Hello and welcome to Classic Motorsport Podcast. I'm Gareth Thomas and today we're looking at the 1978 Italian Grand Prix. A race that Mario Andretti clinched the World Championship, the last win for Alfa Romeo as an engine supplier, and a race where tragically it cost the life of Ronnie Peterson. I'm going to do it in two parts. First part is explain the Peterson incident and what had happened, and then the second part is the race. So, heading into Monza, Andretti was on a high after winning at Zandvoort and headed to Monza to potentially become world champion. Peterson, on the other hand, was getting fed up with Team Lotus on the way that he was being treated. Before the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort, he had signed a contract with McLaren for the following season. Theoretically, he could ignore Colin Chapman's orders to stand back for the first driver. Mario Andretti did not suit Ronnie, and he grew increasingly irritated since Peterson was given slower tyres for practice, heavier cars, waste tyres in qualifying, and less attention from mechanics. Even if Ronnie had gone against Chapman at Monza, there were two more races that season. Ronnie chose to continue to follow the contract that he had signed. Peterson said, "I'm going to McLaren next year. I'm not announced yet, but Mario knows," referring to Andretti. "Some of these people who say I should forget our agreement now. I don't understand them. I have open eyes when I signed the contract, and I also gave my word. If I break it now, who will ever trust me again?" Colin Chapman, Lotus boss, kept Ronnie on a short lease. Already during the start of Friday practice, the engine, Ford Cosworth engine in the Lotus 79, breaks down. Ronnie interrupts his practice only after a few laps. During the second practice session, the Lotus 78, which was used early in the season, was available, but Ronnie does not try too hard with it since the 79 would be ready in Saturday morning. Obviously, after Friday practice, Andretti and Peterson go back to the hotel. Chapman gets a ride with Peterson, but Andretti gets there first because Colin shouts at Peterson to slow down on the public roads. Mood is good, but still tense. The new Cosworth DFE engine is ready for the Lotus 79 on Saturday for Peterson, but the problems continue with faulty brakes and problems with the clutch. Peterson does not get to drive much on the Saturday and does not improve his best time from Friday. Fifth best practice time of 1:38.2 starts on the third row of the grid, unusual since Lotus dominated the season. Mario Andretti took pole ahead of Gilles Villeneuve, with Villeneuve in the Ferrari being the first non-ground effect car. The second row was Jabri and Lauda. Peterson had engines alongside him on row 3. 32 cars entered. Howard Ertl, Kegi Rosberg, Rolf Stoneman and Alberto Colombo failed to pre-qualify. Ertl was given a chance in the ATS, but didn't qualify, along with Hector back in a Lotus 78. Michael Blakemolen in another ATS, and Carl Fritchie, known as G-Max, the first fictitious name to enter F1, failed to qualify. So 24 cars started the race for Sunday. During the half-hour warm-up on Sunday morning, the lid of the brake fluid container pops off. Without brakes, Peterson crashes in at 150 kilometers an hour in the second chicane. Peterson said afterwards the brake pedal suddenly fell to the floor and I went straight through 4 or 5 safety nets and hit a tree. And that was Peterson speaking after the accident. The Lotus 79 was demolished. Peterson complained about sore legs, but does not seem too bothered. Ronnie Peterson's Swedish manager, Stefan Sevenby, spoke to Colin Chapman and asked him if it was okay for Peterson to use Andretti's spare car. The team had only produced 4 Lotuses, but Mario crashed one at the Dutch Grand Prix and not yet been restored, but gave a negative answer. Another slight problem with using Andretti's spare car was that Peterson was taller than Andretti, and there would have been difficulties getting Peterson into Andretti's spare car to get set up, so there would have been more modifications. After some arguing in the pits between Chapman and Sevenby, Chapman gave Ronnie an ultimatum. Chapman said to Peterson, sign for Lotus the next season, which is 1979, you can have the car, which is the Lotus 79. Peterson already had been suggested a very lucrative contract as Chapman gave the ultimatum, which Chapman offered, but since Peterson knew Andretti had been promised a contract guaranteeing him the position of first driver, there wasn't really much to think of. Peterson chose to enter in the old Lotus 78. Peterson said, I think the TV viewers back home, referring to his home in Sweden, will see an exciting race. It really doesn't matter which car I drive. If only the 78, which is the Lotus 78, works, I'll be on the podium after the race. And that was Peterson's words basically prior to the race. After a weekend like this, Peterson would have lost his temper. Nevertheless, he keeps getting ready for the race with a smile on his face. Peterson has matured his respect, but some have asked themselves if Ronnie was fit to enter the Grand Prix. At the time, there was no real medical examinations were made after the crash during the warm-up. Time is short. Peterson watched the mechanics, Bobby Clark and Rex Hart, change engine in the old Lotus 78. He still feels confident and make a good result. It was his luckiest circuit, only retired on 2 previous occasions. 3 times he won. 1976 was his prize in the March 761, which he did win, and then in the Lotus 72 in 73 and 74. Peterson was close to winning in 1971 driving the March 711, but he didn't manage to squeeze himself past Peter Giffen on the finishing line, which was in fact the closest race in F1 history. Peterson was relaxed and gave an interview on the Sunday morning after the crash. He was also given a puppy, much to former world champion and ABC journalist Jackie Stewart's amusement. Stewart at the time was a broadcaster for ABC, and as they given a puppy to Peterson was a bit of a surprise. Then after that, Peterson joined racing colleague and journalist Harold Ertl as the pair walked towards Peterson's Lotus 78. Peterson used the warm-up laps to get feel to the car. He had time to have the wings adjusted in the pits before he joined the starting grid. The 24 cars rolled up to the start, and Peterson felt the adrenaline. Another race at Monza, which he had so great memories before. There was packed grandstands at the time, but all of them were Ferrari fans, so numerous tifosi gathered for the Ferraris. 5.8 kilometre long circuit outside Milano. Andretti in pole with the Ferrari of Canada's Gilles Villeneuve alongside, who at a number of races had caused Ronnie great problems with his careless way of driving. Expectations are great. Behind them on the front row was Jabri in the turbocharged Renault and Niki Lauda in the Brabham. Peterson's got Alan Jones alongside him on the third row. Behind them, Riccardo Patrese Arrows, James Hunt's McLaren, Vittorio Bambria's Surtees and the rest of the field. In Sweden, many are gathered in front of the TV. The Swedish TV broadcasts, and Ronnie is once again on everyone's lip. The reports of Peterson's warm-up crash earlier that day has caused some rain. Everyone hopes that Andretti has mechanical problems. They all want Ronnie to become world champion, although the prospects could be better. The 24 cars start moving on the warm-up lap after just a few minutes. The lap is completed and the first cars are slowly back on the grid, one after another. The cars stop in their starting positions. Slowly the field is filled from behind. Most cars are now standing still and waiting for the flag to drop. Andretti's car moves over the starting line, but he brakes before all cars have stopped the green flag. 61-year-old Gianni Rossetti, the race starter, never sees the cars in the back, as back of the field are still not standing still, they're still rolling, but driving 80 kilometers an hour. He makes the mistake, keeping an eye on Andretti and Villeneuve on the front row. Both have moved a few centimetres. Because of this, 5 or 6 cars in the back of the field have good speed when the lights turn on to green. Still, most of the drivers make a decent start and rev their engines along the slightly odd start and finish straight of Monza. The only clear break in this pattern is that Ronnie's Black Lotus, everyone sees that, everyone at Monza and every Swede watching TV at the time, were all focused on Ronnie and cannot help noticing what had happened. Everyone except Swedish TV commentators. It takes some time before Jan Sutherland and Gunnar Palm have understood the situation. Peterson made a poor start and never know why. He didn't seem 100% ready for the start, and it was unlike Peterson. Through his career, he made himself famous for being a fast starter. Peterson falls behind immediately, and it could be possible that he had his eyes on Andretti, who got a bad start since he had to break his false start. Peterson's mother, May Brett, said this time it was a false start. I think Ronnie for the go-ahead signal, and that's why he falls behind at the start. That was the words of Peterson's own mother that had said that about her son's start. Peterson was quickly passed by Andrews' Williams, John Watson's brother, Jacques Lafitte's Ligier. Jody Scheckter's Wolf is the next man trying to pass Ronnie. He passes Ronnie, but he uses the line that defines the Monza track to the old Monza banking, gets past Peterson. And next up was James Hunt's McLaren. He comes up on Peterson's right hand side. It looks like Peterson steers a little to the right. 22 metres wide starting straight, now is after 200 metres into maybe half the width. Has a long time been criticised by a number of drivers, but nothing has been done to meet the demands. First cars won through the bottleneck and then the problem arose. Local boy Riccardo Patrese, driving in his second season of F1 and his first full season, tries to pass as many as possible in the start, driving in very high speed outside the white lines. Coming on the long straight when he comes alongside Hunt, Patrese realises he has to get back onto the track if he's to make it through the needless eyes. He throws his arrows in behind Jody Scheckter, but immediately in front of Hunt. Hunt has no room. Some say Patrese touched Hunt's right front wheel. Rather the wheel, Hunt's McLaren is thrown out to the left and towards Peterson. Regardless, if Patrese touched Hunt or not, it's certain that the accident would never have happened if Patrese hadn't been in the race. Later investigations showed that Patrese held almost 200 km an hour and Hunt 211 km an hour when his left front wheel hits Peterson's right rear wheel. The Black Lotus of Peterson heads for the right hand side guardrail. It's visible how Hunt's McLaren is immediately flown into the air. In a fraction of seconds, a burst of flame came from the Lotus of Peterson, immediately thereafter hitting the barrier. Peterson's car is thrown in an almost 90-degree angle to the right, well over 120 kilometers an hour when he hits the bow, despite the fact that the fuel tanks have special protective elements to prevent explosive fires. One of the fuel tanks is torn off and explodes. It's the punctual extra tank mounted down at the pedals of the 78. Front of the car is demolished from the impact with the barrier, and furthermore demolished, blinked by the smoke, and is hit by Vittorio Brambilla in his 30s and is knocked unconscious by the crash. Brambilla would later survive the accident. In a moment, the catastrophe is a fact. Peterson's car stopped 90 metres from the crash. Total of 10 cars involved. Hans McLaren, Carlos Reutemann's Ferrari, Derek Daly's Ensign, Brett Lunger's McLaren, the two shadow cars of Hans-Joachim Stuck and Clay Regazzoni, the Tyrrells of Patrick Depailler and Didier Pironi. 9 cars were not involved. James Hunt was the first man out of his car, and he rushes towards Peterson's Lotus. The front of the car is torn off and Ronnie is jammed in a burning wreck. Peterson opens his 6-point belts and tries to get out but fails. Without a thought of his own safety, Hunt grabs the yokes of Peterson's yellow overalls and tries to drag him out of the car. Peterson is halfway out the wreck but is stuck with one leg. Hunt managed to kick away the steering wheel so that Ronnie's left foot comes loose. A single brave official tries to fight the fire as best as he can. After a few more seconds, Clay Regazzoni aids Hunt and together they drag Peterson to safety. Oncoming officials help to put out the fire in his overalls. A Toro Mazzara kneels at Ronnie, still no doctor there. Hunt, who pulls Peterson out of the wet, still looks on thinking this is dangerous. The fire was put out while Peterson was being taken care of, and the race was stopped. After the wreck, James Hunt explained to Lennart Eriksson, a Swedish newspaper journalist that wrote for the Expressen newspaper. Hunt said to Eriksson in a moment like there was absolutely no fear. I acted purely on instinct. My only thought was the man in the burning car must get out, which was Peterson. Obviously that was Hunt's view on what had happened when he went to go and rescue Peterson. Although Peterson was seriously injured, was still conscious, but the TV images showed clearly how badly injured his legs were. In Gerald Davidson's autobiography, he was very shaken about it, and Hunt did say, I was there before the rescue team and saw a gap between the flames and rushed in. Ronnie was out of the car with half of his body, but his left leg was stuck. I saw the flames on his legs. I tried to pull him out, but it was not possible. The steering wheel had jammed his legs, and I called for the officials to help me. We kicked on the wheel until it gave in. Then we pulled Ronnie away from the fire, and that was Hunt's memory of what had happened when rescuing Peterson from the wreck. Hunt's ex-girlfriend, Jane Burbeck, said that on basically Hunt's version of events was said as this. When Hunt looked Ronnie in the face, he said it was filled with fear. He saw that Ronnie was said that Ronnie was bad, and he was terrified. After that, Ronnie was left lying on the track waiting for an ambulance with a doctor arrived. During the whole time, Peterson was conscious and speaking to those who were there. Hunt, along with many other drivers, was very disturbed after the crash. Hunt immediately talked about retiring from racing. Depailler had lost his interest in continuing, and when a restart was announced, a number of drivers initially refused to race. Hunt was later awarded the gold plaque at Künstler Automobil Kingdom, Automobile Club of Sweden, for his efforts in saving Ronnie from the flames. The transportation for Peterson, who was still on the track, was a very long time since the accident. The end of Monza's start-finish straight looked like a war scene. Peterson was fully conscious and not on the judge to be the most seriously injured. The most seriously injured was Brambilla, who was still unconscious. His helmet had been cracked from flying debris. Brambilla would later survive, of course, as I said earlier. An official seen trying to whip the helmet of Peterson despite the chain strap having been opened. He yanks Ronnie head. Finally, after opening the strap, the helmet comes off. After scenes of eternity, an ambulance can take Ronnie to a waiting helicopter finally arrives. There seems to be some confusion of how long it really took. One of the 7 ambulances at Monza. Back in 1978, Fokker hired Sid Watkins, a neurosurgeon, to go across all Grand Prix to look after the medical side of things. And he said in his autobiography, Life on the Limit, Triumph and Tragedy in Formula 1, at the start, Watkins was close to the race control tower. Immediately after the accident, he tried to get to the scene of the accident, but was prevented from getting there by the police and carabinieri, since he didn't work directly for the racetrack. The guards formed tight lines cross-tracked and stopped everyone trying to get to the accident. Peter Briggs, a member from Team Surtees, was hit in the back of his head with a baton when he tried to find out about his driver Vittorio Bambilla's condition. Others were hit with rifle shots. One of the Italian officials tried to explain the situation in order to help get information on Ronnie and Vittorio's condition, but without any success. Nowadays they would not have allowed police officers like that near a racetrack. Whilst being carried away on the stretcher, Peterson raised his arm, and many sees this as proof as he was okay, albeit injured. Many spectators managed to get through the track, tried to touch Ronnie while carried into the ambulance. One managed to fix his head, and that was James Hunt. An Italian police officer asked for his autograph, but is pushed aside, and Hunt walks back to the pits. Bumps into Sid Watkins and explains Ronnie is hurt, but an ambulance and a doctor has arrived. Professor Watkins then decides to go to a medical centre, 3-4 minute walk from race control through the pit area. Wednesday arrives at the same time as the ambulance arrives with Peterson. Immediately after the injured drivers have been removed, the track is cleared from debris, cars, oils, and so on. At Monza's medical centre, there is total chaos. Officials, photographers and spectators gather around Ronnie. Only after a while, the medical team's 6 doctors get their piece to start their work. Peterson was conscious during the whole time. Sid Watkins was there when Ronnie is given a drip. Immediate injuries are obvious. Both legs, more or less, broken and crushed. Chest and shoulders superficially burnt. Together with all the other debris, Peterson's car was quickly transported from the site of the crash. After the race, Con Chapman sees all the Lotus cars being transported out of the country. He has early experience from Italian authorities and does not want to risk having his cars impounded during long investigations. It's not the first time Chapman had cars impounded for investigations. In 1961, when Wolfgang von Trips in a Ferrari was killed along with 14 to 15 spectators, they impounded Jim Clark's Lotus because Clark was involved in a crash. In 1970, when Jochen Windt was killed in a Lotus, they had to impound Windt's damaged car so that they can investigate. The Lotus 78 was written off after the crash, but a new chassis was made from spare parts. But it wasn't until 2003 that Clive Chapman, Colin Chapman's son, who heads Classic Team Lotus, destroyed the last parts to stop souvenir collectors. Rex Hart, a mechanic for Lotus at the time, said, We got gloves and helmet back after they had taken him to the hospital, and there was practically no burns on the gloves or the helmet. Ike Strandberg, who was a former mechanic of Peterson's, and at this time in '78 was a mechanic for McLaren, said he still had his overalls on and you could see that one leg was hurt. He told me he had great pain, and those were the last words he said to me. And that was Peterson saying that to Ike Strandberg, a McLaren mechanic and a former mechanic of Peterson's. Peterson's prognosis was promising. Drippers attached to his right arm, and his blood pressure was surprisingly normal. He gets several intravitreal infusions. Medical team starts to splint his leg injuries, which appear complicated. At this point, several people have entered the medical centre. Among others, paparazzi photographer trying to take pictures through Sid Watkins' legs. He's kicked away by the professor and tries to kick him back in the shot and colours. Watkins did say Ronnie Peterson spoke clearly. He was very anxious that I would come to the hospital as quickly as I could, which he promised. After that, Peterson said, "Please don't leave me, Prof," because Peterson was scared. Ronnie was rolled over to a stretcher to the waiting helicopter. People tried to touch Ronnie as he was a holy wreck. Emerson Fittipaldi's personal doctor, Raphael Gresses-Roberts, has joined the medical centre. Professor Watkins asked him if he could go with Ronnie in the helicopter, but just like Sid, he felt obligated to stay at Monza since the restart is planned. While the helicopters embarked, team notice manager contractman arrives and informs them Ronnie's odds and to which hospital which they were sending him. Then the helicopter starts to make 10-minute flight to Oslo Majori in Nigeria, just outside Milano. Riding with Ronnie in the helicopter was Lars Kessel, an ex-F1 driver. Whilst chatting to Kessel, Peterson said, "How serious are my injuries down there? It hurts terribly." And that was Peterson telling Kessel about the injuries that he had after the start crash. Peterson saw the burns on his left hand and arm, but his comments focused on his right foot and leg. Kessel didn't know what to say and told him they were on the way to Hospital Milano and they would soon be there. Loris Kessel then said, "When we carried Ronnie into the hospital, he was still conscious and complaining about severe pains. I promised him he would be sedated, and then Peterson just blinked and he said, 'Okay.'" And that was Peterson's conversation with Loris Kessel. While Peterson was being transported to the hospital, Stefan Savenberg, Peterson's manager, contacted Peterson's parents, May Britt and Ben Peterson. They were watching the race from their home in Örebro, Sweden. They had been watching the race live on TV and quickly realised Ronnie was involved in the wreck. They'd seen Peterson in his characteristic overalls being dragged away from the burning wreck by Hunt and Regazzoni. So I contacted him. He said he could inform that Ronnie was alive and that he was on the way to Nagoda Hospital. And Savenberg was on the way to the hospital himself to find more detail. They contacted Peterson's wife Barbara and know that she was going to Milan. But Barbara wasn't contacted until an hour or so after the wreck by Corn Chapman. Normally she would join Ronnie during the races, but stayed at home in Monaco with their two-year-old daughter Nina. She hadn't seen the wreck on TV since it was not broadcast directly. She gets ready to immediately get to Milan. Bernie Eccleston, team manager and owner of Brabham at that point, and head man of Fokker, puts his private plane at its disposal and gets permission to land in the dock on the airport of Nice Airport so that Barbara could get there first thing in the morning. When Stefan Sevenby arrived at the hospital, he immediately gets in touch with Ronnie. Sevenby said that Peterson instantly recognised him and wondered what would happen at the hospital. Sevenby informed him that the doctors were preparing an operation and that the injuries were not as considered as life-threatening, and then Peterson said, okay, and that was Stefan Sevenby, Peterson's manager, stating after the accident and in the hospital where they were waiting for the operation. Less than 2 hours after the crash, the race at Monza was started. I'll get to that bit at the end of the programme. Whilst the race was going on, a bulletin from the Nigeria hospital said that they were worried over the blood circulation in Peterson's legs. In a later interview, Sid Watkins alleged that the doctors judged it necessary to fix Peterson's bone pipes in a correct position with internal and external nails and pins. One of the doctors at the hospital, Nicola Pezzi, had made fruitless attempts to talk to Peterson. He had been nothing in particular, so just wanted to make contact with the patient. At 11 p.m. on the Sunday night, the doctors of the Nigeria hospital held a press conference. They announced that Ronnie Peterson's condition was satisfactory, and this is remarkable that he would walk in 2 to 3 months. And that was the doctors of Lagada Hospital with the doctors at the press conference. Lennart Eriksson, an editor of the Swedish newspaper Expressen, was present at the press conference. He tried to contact Ronnie several times, and he said Peterson was too ill, too affected by the medicine. Those who said Ronnie gave the go-ahead for the operation personally are wrong. He was completely out of it at certain times. By the chance I met a Swedish doctor working at the hospital. He had a different view on the condition. He asked Eriksson what hotel I stayed at and promised to telephone him if anything changed, which the doctors did contact Eriksson at 6:30 the following morning. Prior to the operation, Stefan Sevenby was consulted by the doctors. He had a difficult decision to make how and where Ronnie is to be treated. Therefore, Sid Watkins, there was also 3 Swedish doctors and other Italian doctors. Even Ronnie, who was cautious, presented to the options. The operation options for Ronnie Peterson were stay at the hospital in Milan or fly to another hospital. Switzerland and Austria were mentioned, where they had large experience from complicated fractures after alpine skiing accidents. Even Peterson's home country, Sweden, is mentioned, and so another country in England. Wait with operation, risking a worse result, possibly amputation, or operating at once, risking bone embolism. While Sevenby was making his final decision and consulting with the doctors, Werner Wissel, an ex-F1 driver, arrived at the hospital, talked to Ronnie after being given painkillers, and Peterson looked a bit optimistic after being given the painkillers. Peterson did say it is crap with the legs, but if they could fix Graham Hill's, they ought to be able to fix mine as well. I'll be okay for the next season. And that was Peterson speaking to Werner Wissel prior to the operation. After consultation with the doctors, Sevenby decided that Peterson was to stay at the Lagada hospital and to be operated at once. Decision was clearly a top surgeon is to be present, someone who is to foot and leg fractures like Ronnie's. When Ronnie was informed, he is calm and focused. Stefan also told that he phoned the surgeon to perform the operation. Since he wasn't on duty at the moment and it was around 7 o'clock, the decision on what to do with the worst fractures, whether to operate or amputate, was based on Ronnie Peterson's last words to Stefan Saramai. "I want to be able to drive on Watkins Glen. Please make that possible." And that was Peterson's last words to his manager, Stefan Saramai. Vissel looks at the X-ray pictures together with Peterson and tries to cheer him up. They both agree that his injuries should be able to fix. Then Peterson falls asleep. The situation is cautiously optimistic, even if it's uncertain if Peterson would ever drive a race car again. The operation then starts. Whilst that was going on, Professor Watkins is driving to the hospital with Mario Andretti and Colin Chapman in a Rolls Royce, which had been provided for them during the Italian Grand Prix weekend. It takes a lot of time to get loose from the Tifosi, the Ferrari fans at Monza. Andretti knows a shortcut because he was born in Italy and would know the area of Monza quite well. And now on the freeway, they arrive at the hospital, and it had started some hours ago. Professor Watkins gets invited to join the operating team. Seems to go well. Surgeons work on fixing the last fractures, and if this announces all Ronnie's vital signs were fine, blood transfusion with blood types were performed. Watkins looks at the X-ray plates and count to 27 fractures. The responsible doctor announces the operation is finished and that everything had gone according to the plan. It takes 2.5 hours regarding the circumstances. It is not a long time. Peterson was then moved to the intensive care ward where his fellow racing colleague Fedor Bamber had already been taken care of. One of Ronnie Peterson's old friends, the journalist Frederick Patterson, took himself to the hospital. In Patterson's book, The Viking Drivers, he described how he got a choke off when he arrived at the hospital. He said, "It is filthy and all over the floors are cigarette butts. You didn't get the feeling of being at the hospital and everywhere was photographers waiting for the picture. Somehow it was a nightmare you only wanted to wake up from." And that was Frederick Patterson's memory of what had happened at the hospital in his book. At this point, no one thinks that Peterson is about to die. In the waiting room, Saramai contacts Peterson again. Others present actually that were there were Andretti, Chapman and Professor Watkins. Over the phone, Professor Watkins reassures Peterson's wife that he thinks Ronnie will recover. Plans are made for Peterson's wife Barbara to get to Milan in the morning and a helicopter is arranged. It's gone past midnight. Chapman and Andretti decide to go back to Villa d'Este in Como. Saramai managed to arrange a hotel for himself and Sig Watkins near a hospital. They had earlier checked out from their regular hotels, thinking that there wouldn't be any issues at the end of the race, but that's what had happened. Italian orthopedist Stefano Zerbi, one of Italy's most skilled and renowned surgeons, joined the operation when it began. He took an active part in it. He explained Peterson's injuries and could be summarised with this: 8 fractures on the right leg, 1 fracture over the ankle, the bone is straight, a common injury among traffic victims and skiers, 1 slated fracture below the knee, a crack in the shank, not too difficult an operation. Right femur, severe damage, must be nailed together. Relatively simple though. 4 fractures on the right foot, severe damage, at least 4 heel crushed, bones are tattered. Achilles tendon hole torn off. Fracture on left fibula is off. And there's burns on left hand and arm towards the shoulder. Later during the night, Dr. Zerby also said it is far from certain that Ronnie would get his sensitivity back in his right foot. I am critical to the fact that the doctor started the operation in such a hurry. I would never have done this if Ronnie had been in my private clinic. And that was Dr. Zerby's opinion as a medical doctor. Lots of Swedish newspapers were quick to write the article on Ronnie's crash for the edition of September 11th to announce the operation went well. Peterson's mother, May Brett, said maybe it was time to stop racing after an incident like this, and that was Peterson's mother speaking to newspaper journalists. Peterson's condition turned for the worse during the night. Things had drastically turned for the worse, and the optimism from the evening before was just a memory. Just before 4 in the morning, Staffan Sernberg received a phone call from the hospital informing him of the situation. Staffan awakes Sid Watkins in the room next door, and they went straight to the hospital. On the way to the hospital, Sernberg told Sid Watkins that someone claiming to be a doctor had called Peterson's wife Barbara during the night, saying they thought the Italian doctors were killing her husband. And that was Sernberg telling Sid Watkins en route to Nagorda Hospital. Arriving at the intensive care unit, the neurosurgeon informs them that Ronnie developed breathing problem and being ventilated by a machine in an attempt to keep the blood oxygen level normal. X-rays showed that he developed multiple emboli in his lungs. The emboli came from the fat in the bone marrow entering his bloodstream. As a consequence, his kidneys also showed declined functions. Peterson was unconscious, and a neurological examination showed signs of serious brain damage. An Italian doctor, Fat Embolism, had been working as a doctor in Sweden for many years, speaks Swedish fluently, and lives in the city of Oslo, 80 kilometers outside Milan. When he hears about the accident, he contacts Seba and offers him his assistance. When he arrives in hospital in the morning, Peterson in a deep state of unconsciousness, and the situation was critical. Early in the morning, Varro explained to the Swedish newspaper Expressen that Ronnie had difficulty breathing. He was being ventilated by a respirator. He thinks it was completely wrong of the doctors to perform such a large operation that night. It would have been enough to operate his feet, but they also operated on the knee and femur, too weak for such a large operation. An embolism entered Ronnie's lungs, and the lungs could no longer support his body with oxygen. Or Peterson should have immediately been flown to Sweden for specialist care. In Sweden, they don't perform surgeries like this. It's no longer a question of treatment. We must try and keep Ronnie alive. You can't live long in a respirator, and that was Pierengo Varro speaking to a specialist. Professor Watkins looks through an option in Ronnie Peterson's eyes and identified fat grooves obstructing the small arteries in the retina. The situation is more or less hopeless, and on Professor Watkins' suggestion, the neurosurgeons agreed to take an program to get the situation clear on Peterson's brain functions. At this stage, Lotus Boscon Chapman, Brabenbos and Fokker Hedman and Bernie Eccleston were informed. They arrived, and as soon as they arrived, Peterson's brain was scanned, and it's certain nothing more can be done, as Peterson had no longer any brain functions, and the end was near. And he was pronounced dead at 11 minutes past 9 on September 11th, 1978. Autopsy confirmed a few days later fat embolism as the cause of death. Flat boobs were evident in the lungs, kidney and brain. Peterson's wife Barbara was still en route to Milan. Emerson Fittipaldi arrived with his wife shortly after. Stefan Sabai met him and informed them that Peterson was dead. Fittipaldi said, "I just can't believe it. We've been friends for so many years and now he's gone. Racing will change a lot for me. He was one of the greatest drivers and no one will replace him," and that was Emerson Fittipaldi, who was at that stage a driver-owner for his own team. Frederick F. Patterson, a friend of Ronnie Peterson's, wanted to be left alone after receiving the news and goes outside to get fresh air. Whilst he was outside, he meets Mario Andretti, who hasn't yet heard the news, on the way to the hospital to visit Ronnie, but Andretti alleged that it was at the toll booth that he heard the news that Ronnie had died, but that story was told in a 2012 F1 Legends interview. But Andretti did say, "Oh no, I wanted the title so badly, but I did not want to win it like this. What the hell shall I do with it now? I don't feel anything for it. One of my best friends is gone and motor racing will never be the same again. I'm really looking forward to next year. He in the McLaren and me in the Lotus, and we would have a good fight and afterwards sit down to have a beer and good laugh about it." And that was Mario Andretti speaking about the death of his teammate and friend Peterson. Peterson's body was brought to the hospital chapel under the large Decker cross, under the large nut pipes in the park. Candles were placed around the open casket, according to Italian tradition. Peterson friends and friends started to arrive, wishing to say goodbye to their most popular driver. For a few hours, everything stands still in Milan. Or perhaps not. H. Sternberg, a McLaren mechanic, and an old mechanic of Ronnie's had been in the hospital all night to the end. When he walked out of the hospital, he couldn't understand why the streetcars still ran. Sternberg also said, "I couldn't understand why they haven't stopped. To me, the whole world had stopped." And that was H. Sternberg on Peterson's death. Peterson's wife, Barbara, doesn't make it in time to say goodbye to her husband. When she lands at Motorsports Airport, she is met by Stefan Sabai and Emerson Fittipaldi, who delivers the bad news. She never overcame her grief. The same day she plans to go to Sweden and meet Peterson's parents in Nuremberg. Outside Nuremberg Hospital, thousands of people come. Peterson fans want to say goodbye. Some of them bring flowers, and among the mourners were Emerson Fittipaldi, Patrick Tombay, James Hunt and Hans-Joachim Stuck. In the Expressen newspaper, Leonard Eriksson also tells of the tuner, Bravoni Junker of the Weber factory Prix in Milano, and said, "I've never met Peterson, still he was a good friend of mine. I was at Monza to watch him practice in the race. I always go there when there's a race. Peterson was my favourite, great champion, and it's a pity he never became world champion." Around the world, the death notice was received with consternation. Many of Peterson's close were on their way home when they heard and see the horrible news at the airports. In Britain, BBC TV televises a memorial. The newspapers are filled with stories about Peterson, who was a great star abroad than we perhaps understood. For the people of Sweden, Swedish newspapers make the assumption that Chapman's comments on his death was, "Things like this happen," but Chapman was affected and struck by Peterson's death, as was Peterson's friends and companions. Rex Hart, a team Lotus mechanic, said that the old man, referring to Chapman, was sentimental, had a good notion of Ronnie. He wasn't just another driver, but he was close to him in many ways. They had their little problems, but he was shaken to the bone when Ronnie died. Colin, which was Chapman, was very upset. I remember thinking I didn't know what he could be that way. I thought Ronnie was just another employee. And that was Rex Hart, a Team Lotus mechanic. There was a lot of discussions in Swedish magazines whether the doctors did the right thing to operate as early and in the way it was performed. Looking back, it seemed obvious that everyone involved did their best and decisions were correct. On the other hand, we know if the accident didn't happen today, Peterson would not have died, partly because of the cars, which are now a lot safer, but also the surgeries performed nowadays are deal with greater safety. Peterson's former manager, Cedric Eriksson, said when Ronnie died, Sweden stopped or was quiet. In many workplaces, nothing was done during the day. People only discussed how Ronnie could die that way he did. In schools, the children cried. Their great idols got gone. Some schools had to close and the children were sent home. Directly after Ronnie Peterson's autopsy on September 13th, his body is flown from Milan, Italy, to Sweden on the afternoon. They used Colin Chapman's plane to transport the coffin to the airport in Stockholm in Sweden, alongside Chapman on the plane, which he piloted, were Peterson's wife Barbara, Ike Strandberg, a McLaren mechanic, and Stefan Saberby, Peterson's manager. At Asman Airport, a car from the funeral parlour awaits to drive Ronnie's remains the last 200 kilometres home, and on the Thursday morning at 2 o'clock, Ronnie's back home in Orenburg. The coffin is placed in a room adjacent to the crematorium until the funeral at the St. Nikolai Church on Friday afternoon. Ronnie's mechanics have been sent flowers with a long letter as a last greeting to their deceased friend. Another bouquet is placed along with the jet black ribbons when Peterson went Ronnie 1978. Already in the morning, people gather to follow the funeral. Ireland fires already gushed an hour or so before the funeral guests arrive. Crowd outside grew larger, so much so that Swedish police arrived and around 5,000 to 6,000 people gathered for the funeral. Peterson's wife Barbara was accompanied to the church by Peterson's brother Tommy Peterson and the pastor of the church, Ig Blomqvist. The nearest relatives took their seat. At the front, their seats were Peterson colleagues sat, all world champions, Hunt, Lauda, Fittipaldi. Ceremony was simple and worthy. 3 memorial speeches were held and all over in 45 minutes. Began with Gary Exon by Rutland paid on a great organ by Ulf Anderson. After that, Roosevelt sang Wagner Gam and their song. 105 verses, 105 were sung and then the funeral was officiated. Pastor Ink Blomqvist of Amberg Paris was officiating the funeral. He said, God is close to us in hard times. Let us in mind and fear and come to rest with this conviction which we bid Ronnie Peterson farewell. All we know how hard his wholehearted commitment in motorsport has led to success and glory. His young years to become a race driver that once began modestly in Albury in Orenburg. Over the years he has evolved and at the end of one of the greatest in his profession. If his name carried a special glow around the road, there'd be a large background of courage, skill and strength. He loved his work and accepted his terms. Most of all, we all wish you never had to see this picture tell us of the accident that happened. The tragic outcome has brought a strong dejection to everyone that who knew Ronnie. Rodder's blow hits his wife Barbara and his nearest. In this moment, we think with strong sympathy of you. The external word in him, we heard that word and we want to bring God himself into our lives. Beyond our limitation, he is the limitless and external. Sometimes Ronnie also spoke to him. think what he said was that he shared some of his inner thoughts. I think someone up there likes me. So simple and beautiful, he expressed the conviction of what God is part of our lives, even in death. And that was Pastor Inquest of the Embury Church speaking at Peterson's funeral. Then followed the rituals during the funeral of Earth, the prayer and the blessing and hymns. The Peterson family expresses their wishes for limitations on speeches at the funeral. His only chairman of Swedish Motorsports, Bert Nordholm from Gothenburg, and the chairman of the council, who held a short speech each. Peterson's colleagues carried the coffin, which were John Watson, Emerson Fittipaldi, James Hunt, Nicky Lauda, Georgie Scheckter, and H. Franklin carried the coffin together. There was guests as well, including Gunnar Nelson, who was battling cancer, which sadly Nelson would lose his battle. Barbara and Tommy Peterson followed behind. Inside the church, 500 attended the ceremony. 5,000 gathered for the burial and the procession to Albury Cemetery. Relatives and guests followed in 7 rented limousines. At the cemetery, the coffin was lowered to a grave that last farewell. There was yellow roses, yellow ribbons. There was lots of guests with lots of messages. So many people, including Chapman, Ken Tyrrell, Anne Rees, Frank Williams, all the guests they would see. In a book written by Ronnie Peterson, titled Ronnie the Racing Driver, Peterson said prior to his death, "If I was scared in the literal meaning of the word, I would never have started racing. Racing is dangerous. Everyone knows that. The risks are there all the time, and we know who race counts them in. We know that sooner or later we run off and land in some safety nets about as part of the job, but I don't sit and think of killing myself. Death comes when it's supposed to. They just put you in the ground." And that was Peterson speaking at this prior to Monza, as said in the book Ronnie the Race Driver. Although Peterson was dead, but the tragedy at Monza had an aftermath. Who was responsible? After the Italian Grand Prix, they wanted Riccardo Patrese banned from the following race in America. Patrese would later get a court injunction that allowed him to race, but the Arrows team had to withdraw his car as a result. Although over the years Patrese came to be a respected driver and one of those that entered quite a lot of Grand Prix. But that was all. But because of the case, they got an investigating judge, Armando Spector, who was assigned to investigate the accident. 30 of technical specialists of all branches. They worked slowly but thoroughly through the investigation. That resulted in Patrese and race starter Gianni Vassili being charged with manslaughter. The judge summoned a trial. The prosecutors wanted Patrese to be sentenced to 8 months in jail and wanted to prove that Giovanni Vassili started the race despite the fact the cars in the back were still not standing still and therefore partly responsible for the accident. That Patrese tried to overtake James Hunt on the right hand side, but that the track narrowed. Peterson had made a slow start and overtaken by several cars behind Peterson was Hunt and Patrese approaching high speed. Those 3 factors were things the prosecutors wanted. At the trial, Clay Regazzoni, who at this point in his life was in a wheelchair after his accident at Long Beach in 1980, testified of Patrese's dangerous way of driving. Word stood against that the Arrows team had changed tyres to wipe any traces of a collision. Italian magazine Autosprint contributed with a large number of photographs trying to help making a chain of events clear. Among other things, we sent their own photographers. Despite the fact that everyone agreed that Vasily started racing the correct way, he was free due to legal technical circumstances. Patrese was found not guilty after witness, Carlo Rasbruzzi, or whatever his name was, explained that he was from the position of the Fiat Terzina. Patrese was moved more than one car length ahead of Hunt before he turned in front of Hunt's McLaren. Autosprint photographs made an assumption 9 feet possible. 2 years after the acquittals, the jury verdict was made public. According to the jury said that James Hunt was given all the blame. Hunt should have braked and kept his line behind Patrese. But one thing that they did not consider was commentary transcripts from broadcasters. If the court had access to both the videos and the commentary transcripts, Hunt's life could have taken a different turn. Patrese wouldn't have driven so many Grand Prix. And I'm going to show you, for the video watchers, the commentary transcript between Jim McKay and Jackie Stewart of ABC Television when they commentated on the race at Monza. For the listeners that are listening, I'll tell you about it. So McKay said, finish line had come to a complete stop, right, Jackie? Stewart said, yes, it's a light system nowadays, it's not a flag, and the cars absolutely come to a stop, and one car going straight into the pits, Patrick Dornbay going into pits, but the cars must come to a stop. Then a red light goes on, they're under starter's orders, and then only will green light show with the second row you're looking at right now. McKay says, here's the first row with Mario Andretti in a black car on the pole, number 5. Next to him is Villeneuve in car number 12. Villeneuve gets on the start, the green light on. They're racing at Monza. Villeneuve in the Ferrari has the lead. Andretti is second. Peterson is dropping back in the field as there's an accident. Stewart said there's a big crash there. Looks like a car in the centre of the field. It could have been the black car. It could have been Ronnie Peterson. McKay jumps in and said it's a bad one. Stewart says it's a big accident. And then Stewart says it's a big accident. These cars are fuel. There's a driver who looks like James Hunt running into the car that's burning there. He's running the fire a lot of. And then McKay gets the news that it is Peterson. And McKay says the word Jackie is it's Peterson. Peterson in the burning car. Number of other cars involved in it. We'll put them up as we can, but it's bad. It's very bad. He's still in that car and you can see, oh, it's terrible. Stewart said they're fighting the fire and they're very quick onto it. There's James Hunt, there's another driver. Patrick Depailler is in there and Ronnie's. And then McKay jumps in and says they're getting him out of the car. Stewart says he's out the car now, and thank goodness for that. They're getting the fire under control. Yes, the car is Ronnie Peterson's car. The driver themselves getting Ronnie out the car. And there's a lot of other cars involved there. There must be 7 or 8 cars involved. It looks very serious, a high-speed accident. This is Ronnie Peterson we're looking at. He's got leg injuries there, I'm afraid, as well as anything else. McKay said, a look at this replay. This is at normal speed, Jackie. Let's see if we could spot what happened as they come. No question that cars rear of the field, apparently to me, was still in motion, some of them, when they got the green light. Stewart said, well, that was certainly an error of the man who's in charge of the start. He should not put on the red light until all the cars have come to a complete stop, and only then they're under starter's orders, and the green flag be shown. The cars at the back of the grid, we can't see them, are certainly rolling. Mario Andretti, he anticipates slightly at start, but Villeneuve gets away first. Then the cars string away. Niki Lauda gets the break at Mario Andretti. He passes, but it's this middle bunch here in the centre of the field. This accident kills Ronnie Peterson, slams into the wall at well over 100 miles an hour, a very serious impact. Jim McKay goes in and says, all right, here it is in slow motion, Jackie. And Stewart responds, the slow motion seems to be, as I read, in fact, the driver Patrese seems to have come in contact with James Hunt in a red and white car. He bounces across. It looks like he's hit Ronnie Peterson in a rear wheel. Ronnie then veers right, crashes into the barrier. The front of the car has got the barrier. The car leaps across the road, hit the till car, a Didier Pironi, and that was a heavy impact. And of course, all the other cars were involved because they couldn't see because of the instant fire. And then Mario Andretti spoke to Stewart in an interview. The track encourages passes, then funnels down. I'm really worried about Ronnie. It is very bad. They show the ambulance taking Peterson away, and then ABC go to a commercial because the race was shown on a 6-day tape delay because they were showing the Michigan 150 live, and then and this was shown in the middle of it. And then when they came back, Jim McKay did a voiceover stating it was clear at this point that the multiple injuries to Peterson had given Andretti the title. Later, Peterson would die, but not till the next morning. Victory so long anticipated and so much now tastes like ashes in Mario's mouth. They would go before the restart. Interview with Mario, who says it's no time to feel like celebrating, and it has lost the impact. Everything was going so well for both us. So, we go to the second part of this podcast, which is the race. So, obviously, took 20 minutes from medical people to get there. Obviously, the race started at 3:30, and then there was a delayed restart. Non-starters obviously included Peterson and Van Breer, who were already in hospital. Hans-Joachim Stuck was not allowed to restart due to him suffering from slight concussion. Didier Pironi couldn't do the restart because he and his teammate Patrick Depailler both were involved in the wreck. Only one spare car was set up, and that was for Depailler. Brett Lunger couldn't take the restart because his team did not have any spare cars. Race was due to be ready for a restart at 5:15 p.m. While driving from the pit lane to the grid, Jody Scheckter's Wolf lost the wheel and crashed at the second Lesmo curve, bending the Armco barrier, which was right next to the track. Andretti, Hunt, Niki Lauda, Carlos Reutemann and Emerson Fittipaldi all went to the spot where Scheckter crashed, and upon inspection I stated the barrier refused to start until it was repaired. It was later repaired, but because of the amount of time, at 5:50 p.m. it announced that the race would take place, but shortened from 52 laps to 40 to avoid sunset. Race was restarted at 6:15. Villeneuve and overtook Andretti at the restart, and at the end of the lap, both guys were side by side, but Villeneuve held on to lead and pulled away from Zabri in third with Lauda behind him. But obviously Zabri had engine problems. Lauda took on pursuit, but race control gave Villeneuve and Andretti a 1-minute penalty as they judged to have jumped the start. Andretti took Villeneuve with only 5 laps remaining. Lauda, Watson, Reutemann, Laffite and Tempe all finished ahead of Andretti and Villeneuve because they were less than 60 seconds behind. So Andretti and Villeneuve dropped to 6th and 7th. And Andretti's 6th place was basically the result he got, obviously, from the stop-go, and same for Villeneuve in 7th. After the race, immediately, the Monza authorities spent £500,000 with upgrades to avoid a mess like they had in 1978. In prep for 1979 with further upgrades in 1980, thus moving the race to Imola for 1980 before they came back in 1981. So that was the podcast about how the 1978 Italian Grand Prix became so tragic and the death of Ronnie Peterson. I'm Gareth Thomas. Remember, like, share, subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next podcast. Thank you for watching.